So this is Ask Me Astros, and this is a monthly show where we actually take the chart of someone who submitted a question to us. And not only are we going to dive in and actually read this chart live and show you what it's like to observe astrologers actively reading a natal chart and applying it to current transits and things that are going on that are relevant and useful to the client, but also we're going to apply it to you and to things that are going on and are relevant and useful in your world right now. So you will be able to see and observe the process of astrology and an astrological reading. You will be able to understand some stuff that's coming up. We've got a big week ahead of us. So there are some important things that we can't wait to share with you. We're also going to dive into some astrological themes that are often misunderstood, and we're going to bring some clarity and resources to that. And there is going to be, at some point during the video, the opportunity to get a code where you can receive 10% off of a reading with either or both of us. So, CV, how are we doing?
Good. For some reason, when you were so excited there about that code, which is very exciting, but I was waiting for you to say, and snacks.
And snacks. Because I'm a Taurus sun and we're coming into Taurus season.
Exactly. And we were just in Richmond together.
Yes.
And you, I know, are officially the the person of all the snacks.
Yes. Snacks are my hospitality of choice. All right. So while we're waiting for CV to make their triumphant return, let's also explain what Mercury retrograde is. So we are in a pre-shadow phase of Mercury retrograde, which means things happening right now may be foreshadowing things that you're going to revisit between April 21st and May 15th, while Mercury is in retrograde, causing technical difficulties, especially if it shows up in those relevant parts of your chart. So another thing to note is that Mercury retrograde, of course, starts on April 21st, which is this week. I believe it's actually on Friday. It's the day after the eclipse that we'll be covering in more detail during this broadcast as well. So I can see that CV is here, and there she is. Hi.
Okay, I'm going to go with this. This is so strange. I have no idea what they're doing.
Okay.
Good.
Yeah, so this also goes to show that the condition of your Mercury in your natal chart will say a little bit about what Mercury is going to do in relation to its retrogrades. CV, you're a Leo rising, so that means this Mercury is actually square your ascendant as it retrogrades. And I believe your Mercury is in Pisces as well, right? Yeah. So that's a sextile. This might actually be a little bit of a productive Mercury retrograde for you.
I think Mercury is slowing me down. I know we didn't mean to hop into the transits here, but the other day, I mean Friday, I was walking down my steps and like I just dropped my phone. I just dropped it. It's a very beautiful Mercury story though, because it hit, it didn't crack, but it just the screen went out. It gave up on life. And I took it to the Verizon store, and luckily Mercury was looking out for me because they gave me my full, buyback. Oh, wow. So I was able to seamlessly get a new phone, even though I had to deal with all this sort of loss of contacts. It was like Mercury is trying to tell me I was up for the great reset.
Yep. Yeah, it's time to upgrade, whether you want to or not.
Exactly. And
your
I was
car went through that recently too, and Mercury would govern that.
Wait, what?
You upgraded your car recently as well, which is another mercurial.
I did. I upgraded a lot of things. And I think it's a sense sometimes like you lose contacts and we don't talk to those people, or you lose messages, or you have to put things, you have to make update profiles. Yes, this is the Mercury edition. It wasn't meant to be.
And another thing that Mercury governs is writing. And we actually are both writers. You know that as part of the Ask Me Astros Patreon, we do include some writing prompts because we believe that storytelling is an important concept in astrology. But also, as CV visited Richmond this past weekend, we got to visit the museum honoring a specific writer that also really seems to embody the changing of the nodes from Scorpio and Taurus into the next signs, which again, we'll go into more detail with, but Scorpio is what really felt relevant for the Poe Museum, right, CV?
The Poe Museum. And now that I'm thinking about it, did he have Mars in Libra?
I believe, yeah, he did. Yeah. We're the people who go through the Poe Museum looking at the chart the whole time. So, hey, Jill, great to see you.
Jill wants to know about Jill at the end. Jill's wondering if we can go over the part lesson, part workshop, part of Patreon.
Yeah.
Actually, would you want to give a sentence to that real quick?
So the part lesson, part workshop is going to be, and Jill, I actually recognize you, so I know that you'll probably appreciate this. It's going to be writing workshops. So you know me, I like to incorporate writing and storytelling into astrology. CV shares that passion, and so we are going to give you little items to work with that are going to help you kind of write out the story of what you're experiencing with the month ahead or with the transits and your chart and those kinds of things.
Yes.
Anything to add to that, CV?
For me, right, I think storytelling
Mhm.
is integral to how I understand astrology, right? I think about this all the time when I talk to clients that, right, we understand that planets aren't actually causing things, right?
Mhm.
Like Mercury is not actually swimming back in the sky trying to like cause trouble, but
Yeah.
there's symbolic meaning here. But part of when we interact with astrology, we're using our imaginations. It's symbolic thinking. And so like last night I was trying to think through Mars and Cancer with a student, or actually the moon, Mars and Cancer, and then the moon in Aries. And we were thinking about like what the home of Aries looks like.
Mhm.
We went on this whole like sort of imaginary tangent. We decided it had um, iron gates. There was a large arsenal, right? They were keeping firearms on
An
the
armory on the property? Yeah.
lots of fires, big bonfires. Um, at the end of it, we figured something out about the transits, and we were able to sort of a deepening of our study.
Yeah. Yeah. And honestly, the discussion and debate over is astrology causal or correlative,
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah,
Does it correlate or does it cause? That is an ongoing debate that's been going on for 5,000 years, as with many belief systems. But I will support the idea that it correlates, and the storytelling idea.
Mhm.
Plotinus, my favorite quote, the dude who put the plot in Plotinus, it does actually say in his essay of "Do the Stars Cause Things?"
Yeah,
He says, no, you should consider them as characters playing out a role. And that is something that I highly agree with. It's something that a lot of my mentors who have done research before me agree with. And as I've explored that as well, and I think, CV, you've come to similar conclusions, this seems to fit our worldview, the way we make use of astrology and the way astrology resonates with us. So if it resonates with you too, we're really glad to offer this part lesson, part workshop option where you can immerse yourself in the feeling of the story that's unfolding with you, right?
yes, just like we immersed ourselves in the coffin at the Edgar Allan Poe Museum.
There was a coffin and we stood in it. Because like they put it there and told you to. So we were actually following the rules this time, believe it or not.
The Edgar Allan Poe Museum, yes, is in Richmond, where he
Mhm.
neither was born nor died, but did spend a large amount of his life. And there's 3 houses, and you walk through them, and it smells like death, by which I mean it smells like old, rotting things in the best way possible, right? Like,
Mhm.
like old clothes have a certain must to them. And they have a coffin, and you can stand inside of it. And yeah, I was saying that we are saying it's going to this sort of, he was, from what we understand and what charts we have, a Scorpio rising, which totally checks out to me. With that tricky Mars.
Mhm.
For those who don't know, Edgar Allan Poe married his 13-year-old cousin when he was what, 26,
Yeah.
27?
And that was his most like enduring relationship.
Yes, it was.
Mhm. And so the trickiness of the Mars is that as a Scorpio rising in traditional astrology, you would look to Mars as the ruler of Scorpio.
Yeah.
And CV and I are both really well acquainted with Mars. Mars rules your sun and my rising. I'm also a Scorpio rising. But the placement of Mars in Poe's chart is in Libra, which has it falling in the 12th whole sign house for him. So that means that this Mars was a little bit inaccessible, was a little bit subconscious. And you could see he drew that out from the Mars being in sort of the house of suffering, drew it out into his writing. And that seems to be how he really tapped into making use of his Mars and those interesting themes that Libra, often a poet, will bring out.
Absolutely. And I'm just going to add to that I think sometimes Mars and Libra, you get trouble relating. So you get people who just don't know, like, yes, trouble in relationship, right?
Mhm.
And so thinking this idea of like power dynamics.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like you read Poe's biography, it's just filled with like, and this woman did this, and this woman did this, and it's raining out here. And like, I don't know, marrying a 13-year-old when you're like 26 or 27 is just a very obscured power dynamic. Hello, Mars and Libra.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially when it's I believe it was like as a favor to his aunt that he did it. Like there was, I think, I'd have to go back and read the walls of the little houses that made up this whole complex.
You know, when you're marrying a 13-year-old, like the aunt's involved, right? So there's something there, but there was just this long handwritten note that was like, she is the most beautiful woman I've ever seen, and creepy.
Again, not agreeing with it. I think that's how he justified it to himself.
No, we're not.
That's what I can do.
I don't know how he hasn't been canceled.
Right. I mean, his biographer, if you go there, his biographer actually hated him. So a lot of the original biography we had of Edgar Allan Poe was not true to the facts. Anyway, it was very much skewed by the opinion of the biographer, whom Poe had spurned as a writer themselves.
Again, spurned. This tricky Mars and Libra plaguing his life. Weekend enemies. Which is how he died when he was 40. He had a weird mystery illness.
Yeah, that possibly came from being beaten up, but nobody really is sure. Yeah. Yeah. What a journey Poe had. And honestly, it's interesting to really discover that and to see I guess Poe wrote about transition a lot, right? There's a lot about death, a lot about morbidity. King and Gaiman and all those other authors really relate back to Poe as inspiring in their inspiration to write thrillers. And he was one of the originals that did that and took that upon himself to actually express this, where people, especially at that time, may not have wanted to. There was a lot of illness going on around that time. Tuberculosis was a major thing. But he took the themes of death and embraced them and turned them into art, whether it's an art that you relate to or really like, or it's one that you're averse to and you just kind of watch it from a distance. There was a lot inspired there. And the idea of transition is really relevant to some of the things we want to talk about today, because not only are the nodes transitioning from Taurus and Scorpio into Aries and Libra, but also we're going to be bringing up themes about the 8th house, which is often related to death and rebirth or transition in that way. We're going to dive into a little bit more that the 8th house can represent, where the idea of death and all the other themes that you might be familiar with about the 8th house came from, the origins both in timeline and in sources. And we're going to be talking about, what that does when it's relevant and highlighted in your life in the year of like the 8th house perfection year. CV, do you have anything you want to add to that? Oh, no.
No, I really had to think about that. No, I'm excited to dive in. Should we dive in with this week's question, this month's question?
Yeah, let's read the question and then we'll go over the 8th house a little bit so that we can really anchor into what we're going to be talking about.
Fantastic. Cool. I'm scared that if I touch my computer to move a screen, that I will have some Mercury issues. Would you mind reading the question?
Yes. So our question is about the 8th house perfection, and the person who wrote into us, which by the way, you can do too. Currently it's askmeastros@gmail.com, but very soon it will be questions@askmeastros.com. So that's really fun. Depending on which one you try, because the email will be activated shortly. So if you try askmeastros@gmail and nothing happens, or you get the didn't go through thing, try questions@askmeastros.com.
And you just thought about KristaLyn. We're gonna keep the askmeastros@gmail, so that can
we'll check on that.
So for that, just stick with that so people don't get confused. Wow, I can't believe I'm the mode of clarity for once. askmeastros@gmail.com. New website forthcoming.
Yes. Thanks. Anyway, so this person asks, I'm about to enter an 8th house perfection year. And whilst everyone is always talking about that being a scary thing, I'm feeling deeply aligned with these topics. I'm pretty death positive, which I know a lot of people aren't, and that's probably part of it. But this literally feels like my favorite little happy place. Why would that be? I know Venus, my chart ruler and ruler of Taurus, which is my 8th house, and the house that Venus is in, they're both in this house for me. So in the 8th house, but so is Chiron. I don't know. I'm not sure why this energy brings me such joy and purpose when it brings most people struggle. And there's also indications that there for me too. I have loads of grief in my past. So perhaps this is just what healing looks like for me. So first thing I want to say to this person is super astute in witnessing so much of your own feelings. I think the fact that you're so wise also plays into a little bit of a replacement of the fear with like this deep honor and ability to like thrive in transition and respect it, which is something that we can also look at in the chart. But the eighth house is most widely known, especially on social media, for death, but it's got other things going for it too, right, CV?
Yes. What is the well, I was gonna say on social media, right? It's the death, sex, taxes. Death.
Mhm.
That's the three.
The big ones.
Yeah, the 3 points.
Yeah.
I will tell you this. It's an elusive house. It's a dark house, right? And so I think there is that sense of death, yes, but of mystery, collective resources, right? So we think of if the seventh is literally what you carry on your back.
Yeah.
The eighth house in opposition is resources that are shared, right? And that's sort of interesting to think about too, is this fact that like death as a resource in a sense, right? So the eighth house can also be, debts, inheritances. There's just this sort of mind, right? But my favorite shorthand for the eighth house comes from my teacher, one of my teachers, Adam Summer. Other people's money, other people's problems.
Yep. Other people's circuses, other people's monkeys. Yeah.
Exactly.
So I'm going to bring up the chart so we can give you sort of an image of what it looks like as we start talking about the relation of the eighth house to the ascendant and really explaining why in a chart it is described the way it is. Okay. So here we can see the ascendant is Libra here, where the AS is. That's your point of reference. And then you can go over to Taurus, the little bull icon here. That's going to be the eighth house. So in case the numbers are too small, you can see it sort of not directly across, because again, as CV mentioned, that's the seventh house, but one apart, one counterclockwise from the seventh house. And with that, another thing that you think about is derived houses, which is to say that the first house represents you in the chart. The seventh house will represent the opposition, other person, partner, whoever is sitting across the table from you, metaphorically. So if the second house represents your resources, then the eighth house would represent the resources of the seventh, which would be the resources of that other person in a lot of cases as well.
Absolutely. And so oftentimes you see with, just to think about the eighth house in general, transit wise, right? Like topics coming up. If the seventh house, you get, maybe there's a pressure of partnership, right? Do we marry? Do we divorce? What's going on? That sort of full moon moment of the first and seventh house. The eighth house is, are we buying a house together? Am I inheriting your credit card debt? All of it.
Yeah. And, thinking about loans and things, it's not necessarily like an immediate snap decision or a debt that's being collected right away. I like to think about our subscriptions, those recurring payments that automatically come off our credit cards. I kind of put those in eighth house spheres as well. I know they're a little bit seventh house because they're your resources, but the fact that they're recurring.
And you know why? Because you forget about them.
Yeah.
Like the eighth house, you can't see them. And then like what happened to me this morning, you're like, I'm subscribing, getting this renewal for this like super expensive shampoo I never used. Yikes. Totally the eighth house is those subscription services. They can get the best of you if you don't look out for them.
Yeah, they sneak up on you. Because again, if we look at the ascendant here and you think about the chart sort of like a car with the ascendant being the windshield, that's what you can see the most. But you have to really look over your shoulder and perhaps even use your rear view mirror. This is still a blind spot. This is that corner of the car that you really can't see. So you have to turn. You have to give it attention in order to be aware of what's happening.
Yeah. It makes me think of something. I think I probably mentioned this like every episode we talk about the eighth house, but it's worth noting is that people who have planets in the eighth house, I've noticed within my personal practice, it's like, the eighth house can be just a real bummer. There's lots of parts of the chart can be real bummers, but you also meet people who like have just like, they've learned to like boss out on their eighth house, right? It went from being like a point, like a blind spot to like, oh shit, I don't know like what subscriptions are being pulled from my credit card, to having to take extra attention to that house. You often see people who are like managers of other people's resources, whether that's like artists. I have a friend who's a funeral director with like mega eighth house placements, right? Not just because of the death part, but the literally he lords over their bodies. He's like the manager over like the deceased, right? Or people like people who run businesses, right? There is something about like learning how to sort of like really owning and really excelling in a place that you have to pay attention to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think you make an excellent point there, because we also think about, why is this person who asked the question feeling like this is their happy place? The ruler of their chart is there in domicile. So of course they've got a little bit more of a feeling of control. It's also in a fixed earth house. It feels solid. It feels perhaps even resourceful to them. Taurus by nature is sort of a resource kind of sign. So with Venus there ruling the entire chart, there is this affinity and this comfort zone that might occur there as well. Now, thinking about the eighth house, there's some other things that I think would be really helpful as like visual stuff. Yes. If you don't mind me going into them a little bit.
Oh no, I am so excited for this research because I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, no, I think this is actually going to be pretty familiar to you. We think about the eighth house as the house of death. And I even saw people, and I share this sentiment on Twitter, saying the seventh house is actually the death moment, right? It's where the sun sets. So if you think about the sun going on a journey, telling the story throughout the day, the eighth house is when the sun starts falling. And according to Maternus, the eighth house is actually, from this house, the quality of death is discovered. So it's not even necessarily the event of death, but the quality of it. Is it a good death or a bad death? Which, by the way, a lot of medieval and ancient astrologers are very preoccupied about the quality of death for the person. Literally every delineation throughout Maternus is good death, bad death, good death, bad death, because they thought about death differently back then. I think that's another relevant thing to bring in as we discuss the eighth house now, is how our culture views death and how different that is to the way culture used to accept or ponder death in more ancient times. But yeah, so the midheaven, the 10th house up at the top, which is Cancer in this chart for reference, or the MC happens to be also in this chart. The sun culminates there. So that's like noon or high noon. The sun's in the middle of the sky at its peak, doing its thing, middle of summer kind of vibes. And then it begins to fall. And the eighth house is where it begins to really lose that ability to hold on and sets over the horizon.
May I just kind of, I think about this a lot. Actually, when I was first learning astrology, Gemini Brett forced me to start looking at the sky and thinking about time of day, right? Which is something that stuck with me. And like the eighth house is that strange time because it's like not quite dusk. It's that weird feeling of like, do I go to dinner? It's not quite afternoon. Like there is a liminal feeling that happens, right? Like depending on the time of year, what, like 5, 6 o'clock.
Yeah.
Again, not quite after. Not quite.
I would say 3 o'clock. Like that 3 p.m. slump where you have to go for another coffee or a snack.
Yeah, but no, I would argue, I think a little later, because it's right before the 7th. So it's right before the setting, right? It's that like, it's almost like after that, right? Because it's like, depending on the time of year, it could be the 3 o'clock slump. Yeah. But I get your feeling. But there is that sort of strangeness of just that feeling of like the days, like what do we do with this sort of the dregs of the day?
Yeah. And I also think like it depends on the quality of work that you've done that day, right? Yes. So the 3 p.m. slump comes from, I started my day very early and now my energy is running low, but I still have so much of the day to go. And that's why we're reaching for snacks and coffees at this time, because our energy, the surplus of energy from lunchtime or from wherever, our enthusiasm is waning. And much like the vibrance of the sun in the 8th house.
Ooh, okay. I like that. I mean, if you sold me, I like the snacks and coffee. Right?
I always talk with snacks. We're good.
Energy's starting to wane, but it's not quite like we can't quite rest yet. That's actually perfect, right?
Yeah.
With the workday, right? Like you can't quite give up yet.
Yep.
You're ready to.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it goes to show that another quality of this house, quoting Maternus, but many people have said this.
Yeah.
It's considered an idol or an inactive house because
Mm.
it's not conjoined in association with the ascendant. So we talked about that right away, where the ascendant is you, the eighth house is hard to access. Think about the blind spot situation. They're not connected by any of our aspects that make pretty shapes in the middle when you make them. So what that does is it makes it really hard for you to have focus there. It's like, again, where you start feeling like, I need coffee to be able to focus again. I need something to get me back on track. Because this house, along with the other cadent houses, cadent referring to houses that are in difficult parts of the chart for the ascendant to access. So we're looking at the 12th house, the 3rd house, the 6th house, and it's not a cadent house. Sorry, it's succedent. But
I'm
it's,
like, yeah, I'm like,
scratch that. I'm totally wrong. Let me retrace my thoughts here. It's mostly because it's in aversion to the
exactly.
ascendant.
It's a
That's
dark
the
house.
main thing, which would be the 12th house, the 8th house, the 6th house, and the 2nd house. The ascendant can't see these guys. So these are your blind spots on the car, and that makes them harder for you to actively participate in, which makes it more of an idle house. Back on track. CV, do you want to expand on that and like clear up everything I confused?
Yeah, no, I think the biggest point you said is there's these 4 houses in the chart, right? The 12th house, the 2nd house, the 6th house, the 8th house, right? And there's something about these houses that like are beyond us, right? If you have the ruler of the ruler of the rising sign in any of these houses, maybe there's a compulsion beyond you, right? Like you can't quite always see where things are going, right?
Mhm.
The 12th house could be a perhaps, it's interesting, both the 12th house and the 8th house are maybe hidden things to different degrees.
Yeah.
The 12th house, maybe there's a sense of a little bit of like self-undoing. The 8th house, maybe there's a preoccupation with other people's stuff. I'm thinking about someone else I know who is a stellium in the 8th.
Oof.
And like their entire life is just like, they're a very successful business owner, but they're just constantly mitigating other people's stuff, right? The 2nd house, maybe there's a preoccupation with survival instinct. The 6th house, maybe there's this sort of endless routine or work that might feel good, but you can lose sight of the sort of larger context of your life, perhaps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it also makes me think, to add to that, like about the idea of the 2nd house as supply and the 8th house as demand.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Right? The 2nd house is how you support yourself and you feel supported. The 8th house is where your energy has to go, where people are requesting the energy from you, other people's energy, shared energy, those kinds of things. And that might be really helpful to keep in mind, when we're thinking about subscriptions, right? It's the demand of the repeated payments.
Do I have enough
compared to
money in my bank account to cover all these repeat subscriptions?
Yeah.
Or is this actually starting to weigh on me because I can't keep up?
Mm-hmm.
We just stumbled. You stumbled across the gem there. That's
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that makes me also think of the analogy we'll get into as we begin talking about the nature of the eclipse that's coming up this week.
Yeah.
Which again, I think, is there more we wanted to cover on the 8th house, or do we feel like we've set the tone there pretty well?
I think you set the tone there, and I kind of I want to say some words as we transition into this chart and we address this person's question, which I think is really important. So, one, they said, I feel comfortable in this place.
Yeah.
And I thought that was interesting because they never actually said what this place is. And so I'd be curious to know, if this is my client, well, what does the 8th house mean to you?
Yeah.
Does it mean that perhaps you have, as you said, lost a lot of people, dealt with some tragedies, and this is something that you've, maybe sort of exploring the sort of depths of your sadness is somewhere that you feel comfortable doing. I don't know. I would ask for clarification around this. The other part as to whether to fear, right? I don't think there's ever any room for fear in astrology, right? We're living our lives, and usually we have some idea what the story is that's going to unfold. It's not like you enter a birthday and suddenly like you're dropped off a cliff.
Yeah.
But that being said, this person's over 40. I'm going to say, and I'm going to take a note from Austin Coppic here, by the time you're 40, most of us have learned how to work with our charts. You know what to expect. Now, granted, it's not like we're going to have the same year. Every year is different. but you understand the nature of your life and what you're working with. And I think there's a certain comfort that comes to that, is that with this eighth house year, you can look back at previous eighth house years, 1931. Am I missing one in between?
I'm really bad at math, so I can look that up. I can look it up with my little handy dandy.
So you could look, so the first step to all of this for this person entering an eighth house perfection year, I would look back to the ages of 1931. I think there's whatever I'm forgetting.
There would be one more before that, and it would be 7.
7. Oh yeah, because we talked about the nature of the Venus. 7, when that Venus first came to bloom. So I might look back at those years and go, is there a certain theme that tends to come across every time I'm in an eighth house perfection year? And that might give you the sort of thread of a story to work with.
Yeah. So if that kind of, again, we're looking at the plot points that have developed this storyline throughout for you. And again, because Venus is supported there and it is the ruler of your chart, you may have more of an awareness, more resources to recall this than on average. I think it's also important to add to your point, CV, that this person has lived life and gotten acquainted with their chart. One of the things to note is that they're coming up on their Uranus opposition, I believe, sometime soon. Let me see this. I'm going to swap my things and make sure I have my charts all organized here. Uranus is currently at 16 degrees Taurus, and the natal Uranus here is at 25 degrees Scorpio. So as Uranus completes by 2026, so there's still some time here, but Uranus is still transiting that opposing house. That's loosely, we think about this as sort of like the midlife crisis moment, but it's also very reflective. It's also, how do I want to make changes in my life? How have things been? Do I feel like I have enough freedoms where I'm at? And do I want to do anything differently? And again, you're seeing Uranus on your, during the solar return for this person.
Yeah.
Venus has just separated from an exact conjunction with Uranus by 2 degrees. So a couple days before your birthday, you might get an inspiration. Or even if you're someone who works with the mysteries, as the eighth house sometimes covers, you might get an activation or a download that's just like, boom, I need to do something different. And that might help govern a lot of your year. I would love to go into what that might look like, but the nature of Uranus is unpredictability. Yeah. So literally anything I would say would probably be wrong. And I'm just going to accept that. But is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Absolutely. I don't know if we've maybe... This is the elephant in the room, although the big hourglass in the room. Venus, for being a Venus in the eighth house, is in pretty good shape. She's in domicile. Yep. She's triplicity ruler of earth signs for day charts. She's ruling the ascendant. She has a big job, and she's hosting the moon. And so, like Venus is significant. And not to say that there's not, it's eighth house, and not to say you haven't experienced difficult things, but I think that of all, this might not be there are more difficult Venuses we could be looking at.
Yeah. And it's not to say you haven't experienced difficult things, but perhaps you have a natural grace with experiencing difficult things and a deeper sense of peace than other people might have a proclivity for.
Yeah, that's a good one. I'm looking at this Venus, and I'm just going to throw out my thoughts here. It feels like a well-resourced Venus ruling the ascendant with Libra. The first thing I was thinking is this person an artist, right? Thinking about managing other people's resources. Venus, the home of things that look good, smell good, taste good, right? The arts of thinking about, maybe this is a Venus that's working right within the context of making beautiful things for people, right? Even though maybe taking some of those difficulties and creating something beautiful. I know that sounds so cliche, but
think Frida Kahlo, right?
What?
Frida Kahlo.
Yes.
Taking something that is difficult, but making it art and making it relatable and helping people feel seen and understood and process and speaking names to things that they can't really express and all of those things.
Good call. Yes. And so seconding that too, with that Venus, not just the Venus in Taurus, but that moon in Libra, like Libra aesthetics, refinement, being the ruler of the rising sign. And I think of like Libra risings of a relational, right? There's a certain amount of this chart that I feel might be preoccupied with somebody else, especially the sort of full moon moment happening. It's not just a moon in Libra, it's a full moon with the sun in Aries, right? That I feel like the sun in Aries is like this need to individuate, Whereas that Libra is sort of like, but what about the other person, right? We get that kind of what about the other person with that Venus in the 8th. So if you are an artist, right, or you make some things, it could be an interesting year, considering also we mentioned, if you look at the secondary progressions, they're coming out of a balsamic year.
Yeah.
So that with this Uranus and these eclipses and a Leo, right? Venus going retrograde in Leo, the sign of the artist. This could be, right, a really potent year for starting something new. Maybe not like, filing your LLC, but perhaps the seeds of something being great, being blooming.
Yeah, I would say like normally for an 8th house year, because it's not angular, I would advise like it might not be that noticeable of a year or that action packed of a year with this chart, because we do have the ruler in the sign, the ruler ruling the chart. And as you mentioned, these super relevant dynamic transits of the ruler transiting or retrograding through Leo. So during your 8th house perfected year, where Venus is the time lord and Venus is sort of guiding you through this year, Venus is going to stop, turn around, and retrace her steps in Leo, which for this person has a relationship with Venus natally. We can see that the Mars in Leo in that 11th house right next to the North Node is just 1 degree separate from Venus, who's moving away. They're mutually separating because Mars is retrograde, but they're only 1 degree apart. So it's still something that may feel really personal, even though it, as you pointed out before, it may have happened earlier in life. That may be something that activates again as Venus kind of goes into this space and stays there for a while. There may be new groups of friends. There may be new ways to stand out in your groups of friends. It is Leo after all. New compromises to make with relationships and friend groups and goals that come from that. And I think one of the things to think about with this also, as you kind of said, is even though it's not the most active because it's not angular, it's almost like these new beginnings are offered.
Yeah.
These are supplied in a way, or invited, I think, with the eclipses moving out of that sign and into an angular position for this person, with Venus moving into a space that really helps realign your priorities for what you want and making that a very individual, what do I have? How do I want to feel seen kind of question. So there are things that balance this in the other direction in a very Libran way, dropping some rice into the other pan, saying like, yeah, it's not maybe you going and getting, but it is offerings coming to you and invitations that you get to be discerning about.
Oh, yes, yes. I'm curious to know too, right? Just a month ago, I have no sense of time, which is terrible for being an astrologer. Venus was in Taurus, right? So
yes,
this person experienced the Venus return not that long ago. And I would be curious to know, maybe some themes came up during that, and maybe that was sort of a sneak peek to this period.
Yeah, absolutely. So checking, I think Venus entered Gemini just last week at some point. I can actually look that up as we're going through this because I have my handy dandy ephemeris on hand. But it's, interesting to think when Venus was at that return, what was going on and how is that maybe going to continue into what we're talking about for the next year? How did that sort of act as a prequel sneak peek scene to the story of the year?
And I got to tell you, when Jupiter is about to go into there, and so that may be in like a round 2. So you might really, because you're now in this 8th house perfection year with Venus as your ruler, you might feel that Jupiter. I would expect, which would be interesting. We were kind of talking about this before, that maybe the Jupiter in the 8th could bring some resources. If your Venus in Taurus, like my Venus in Taurus, really likes to spend money on luxury goods, that Jupiter could bring some debt.
Right. Well, and also to reference back to the Venus return, that would have been exact on March 7th, but thinking to the week of March 5th through the 11th might give you more of an overarching tone to really think about. And if you're someone who journals or does write poetry and expresses a lot, look at what you were creating at that time. Look at the pins that you were pinning on Pinterest around that time. We're thinking kind of aesthetic stuff perhaps happening around that time, and just see what was on your mind. And if that was something that you're like, I feel like I'm going to work on this, but not right now. The right now part of that may come up very soon. And actually, Venus was even your time lord during that period. So this has been going on since your birthday on March Oh, it was actually a little bit before that.
Yeah.
Pardon. March 31st was the birthday. So just before Venus became the Time Lord.
And I think I would be remiss if I didn't say this has been a really strange Aries season as someone who's also an Aries, right? Like I'm used to like, it's Aries season, like Jupiter's with the sun, right? This idea of like, let's go, let's kill it. Spring is here. And I would love to sit down and talk with this person, wondering their experience, because right, this Mars in Cancer is really bumming out a lot of that experience. It's like,
it's been less like taking off at a sprint and more like Bambi taking their first steps.
And then running back and realizing that like their mother is dead. Like,
I mean, there's that too.
It's been kind of like I'm being totally cheeky, but it's been very difficult. If we think, right, it's a good example of, you think something looks good, but you really have to think about who's hosting those planets. Like there's been a lot of, I want to say, like tragedy with this Mars in Cancer, a lot of like, maybe could we take a moment to discuss this, because this kind of gets us into the eclipse season.
It does very much. Yeah, I mean, so by nature, Mars is in fall in Cancer, because Mars is exalted in Capricorn. Mars does well in Capricorn. Capricorn really appreciates Mars being there, even though Mars isn't in rulership. So the exact opposite sign of Capricorn is Cancer, where Mars is now. So when you have someone who's exalted and you take them the opposite from that, they are in fall. And that's what we're talking about when we reference Mars being in fall in Capricorn.
Cancer.
In Cancer. Thank you. It's my words, man. So Mercury retrograde is affecting me as well, just so we all know. I think it does all the time because my poor Mercury's combust. So my brain definitely works faster than the mouth does.
So last night, my dear friend Julie and I were talking about Mars and Cancer, and we came up with an image for it.
Oh, nice.
We're thinking about like the home of Cancer is a giant pillow fortress. And there's like water features throughout. And one of those giant pots of soup that, by the way, Instagram this morning is advertising to me, where people have been like making the soup for like 100 years, just unending, right? Like one of those. And this is the home of the moon. This is Cancer. And Mars enters Cancer. And I think you'd really appreciate that. We decided that Mars in Cancer looks around and is like, so where's the at-home gym? And everyone's like, what are you talking about? And Mars is like, I need to get my reps in. And Mars gets real angry because like Mars like can't work out. And like Mars, it's like this like vegetarian soup, and Mars is like, yo, like I'm on this keto diet. Like Mars just needs like pieces of animals, and it's just so getting angrier and angrier. And you think it's like getting Marsier and Marsier. And it finally like starts using the pillows as a punching bag, and it looks like someone killed the chicken because like feathers are going everywhere. So that is my visual representation, our visual representation of Mars and Cancer.
Agreed, very much so. And it's funny that you're like, I think you could appreciate this when you were there with me when I went to a hotel that promised that there would be a gym and there wasn't one, and I got so frustrated. So yes.
So I think it's what's saying that like Mars in Cancer is like still trying to do Mars, but it's angry and annoying. And sometimes I think like it can actually be like this really aggro version of Mars. Like like Friday night, I came home and my neighbor's house was on fire. I've seen like SUVs on fire. Like it's been like, you can see some really like super martial things because Mars is like ramping up.
Wasn't it? It was about 2 years ago, and I think it was this transit the last time Mars was in Cancer, where we had the ocean on fire because of an oil spill.
I think you're right. Right. Yeah.
I think that was this transit. Saturn was also, in a different place. Like it really fit the bill on that one. But I think Mars was also in Cancer, and we were like, wow, water on fire. Done. Sometimes
Mars in Pisces or something, but Mars in Cancer. But the devastation, I feel like sounds way more Mars in Cancer. But that's interesting to think about. Like a planet in fall isn't like, it's still trying to do what it wants, and it might be more pronounced, but we could say less productive.
Mm-hmm. For sure. It's Mars having to stay at a hotel, but not the hotel that has what Mars needs. So
Yeah.
changing the entire routine, not being able to get stuff done the way that Mars wants to get stuff done. And Mars does want to get stuff done.
Yeah.
So it's like when you're trying to work on a project and people just keep pinging you on, Slack, or pinging you with, sliding into your DMs or something like that. There's the constant interruption from being able to focus on the thing that you want to focus on. Yeah.
And we say all that because this Aries season has been brought to you by Mars and Cancer. And I don't know, like to me, there's been this just like everyone I talk to, this feeling of like urgency of like, I need to get the thing done, but not quite being able to do it, or having some like emotional baggage tied to it.
Yes.
And so that's a lot to begin your solar year with.
Yeah. Yeah. And just for peace of mind for everybody, Mars is not going to spend as long in Cancer as it did in Gemini. It was in Gemini from August 2022 until early March. It will be out of Cancer and heading into Leo the 21st of May. So it will be there by then.
Soon enough.
Yeah. I think it's actually the 20th of May that it will do it. So only about one more month of Mars in Cancer. However, Mars is the ruler of the Aries eclipse that is coming up this week. So, I actually was responding to an interview request from a magazine this morning, and they were like, I want an astrologer to tell me how the May flower moon is going to impact all of the signs. And I was like, it's an eclipse. This is not your moon. Like, dude, I actually said, like, here's what you're asking for, but if you're going to quote me, you need to reference the eclipse and how astrologers do not recommend using this for conscious or magical work. Like, no bueno, don't work with an eclipse, but here's the areas of life that signs might expect to see something occur in. But it was just really funny that, magazines might be talking about the full moon eclipse, which is going to be the lunar eclipse in May. But eclipses by nature are like, even Picatrix says it breaks things. It damages things. I actually quote it on, if you're looking for a more in-depth view of this eclipse and the things going on around it, I did a full video on my YouTube at The Real KristaLyn on YouTube as well. CV also has Art of the Zodiac on YouTube. It's a great opportunity to be able to follow us there. But that being said, it's important to know that this is not the moon to work with. We are not manifesting on this moon. Please don't. Spare yourself. And that's because, in part, yes, it's an eclipse. First and foremost, don't do it. But there's so much changing with this eclipse. CV, is it okay if we go into that a little bit?
Yeah, but I'm going to ask you to step back, and I know because we can get really into our conversation.
I'm Mars ruled, so sometimes CV has to temper me. It makes sense.
Which is like I should temper no. I have a very strong Mars. I just want to point out that eclipses are when we either have a new moon or a full moon, right? Mm-hmm. A lunation on these funny little things in the chart. I don't know if my pointer works. I don't know if I can see, if anyone can see this.
I'm not sure.
Okay, so that thing that looks like a headphone in the chart, and that thing that looks like a horseshoe, right? They're always in opposition to each other. Those are called the nodes of the moon. In Indian astrology, right, or Jyotish, they're called shadow grabbers, right? They're not actual points, but they're these points of chaos because they're these points that extinguish the lights. Mm-hmm. Anything to add to that?
Yeah, just that the literal interpretation of this is they extinguish lights because they are when the moon and the sun meet up at the right degree by declination, as well as by, just being in opposition or conjunction with each other. Yeah. So being on either side of the earth or at the same side and blocking each other out. They do it at just the right angle to block each other out fully. This is when we get the moon able to block the sun. And that's why not every new moon is a solar eclipse, because sometimes the moon's up here. So the sun's rays block it out, but it can't go in front of the sun. And it's also really cool to note that Earth is unique because the apparent magnitude, or the way that the sun and the moon appear in the sky, is the same from our perspective, even though they're totally different sizes, right? But because the moon is closer and the sun's so far away, here's my little doohickeys, the sun is bigger, the moon is smaller, but from where we're at, the moon is close enough that it still blocks that sun out, especially when it comes into the right alignment by declination. So that is the astronomy of it.
Perfect. Yeah. So they're these points of chaos because they're the points that when we have lunations on them, the lights go out. And you think about a time before electricity, this would have been terrifying. So there's a little bit of just kind of to set up what eclipses are. And as KristaLyn mentioned, a lot's changing because about every 18 months, these nodes, which move counter to the rest of the zodiac, will change signs. And so we are exiting. This eclipse is interesting because it is a new moon in Aries. It is an eclipse, but the nodes are still in the Scorpio Taurus axis. They will move out in a few months. And then we will be officially in the nodes of Libra, Aries. So this is an eclipse. It's also a transition.
And that official transition will happen in July.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so what we're experiencing right now is this, I've been explaining it as the, when a book finishes, but you're waiting for the next book to come out and the author starts putting out prequel chapters to sort of tide you over. These are the prequel chapters of wrapping up. It's also when a new game is coming out, you finish the story of the game and you have a year to wait for the new expansion of the game to come out. And in between, the developers will put out patches with little pieces of story that wrap up the storyline from the last one and then slowly start introducing the storyline that you'll have with the next one. These are the interim patches between larger expansions of the video game. If we want to view life that way, which it's not unfamiliar in a lot of ways. So we're getting an introduction to the Aries Libra situation this week. And we begin with wrapping up the Scorpio Taurus May 5th. And we'll see a repeat again where we get two more alternating situations in October. That's when the next eclipse season will be. This eclipse season begins this week on the 20th with a solar eclipse in Aries, which is the second new moon in Aries as well.
I was confused. That really tripped me up.
Yeah.
I was like, how did we, yes.
Yeah. So the last new moon was at 0 degrees Aries.
Yeah.
Which gave the moon enough time to get all the way back around again to have another new moon at 29 Aries, which again, they're going to eclipse. And as they are still eclipsed, they're not even going to really separate from the eclipse before the sun goes into Taurus and begins Taurus season, still quite eclipsed and squaring Pluto. So again, with the idea of change and transformation and activation and evolution and intensity coming up around this, it's a lot.
I would just like to say if there was any sign that would hoard a lunation cycle, I think it would be Aries, which can be a little selfish at times. I say this is an Aries sun. It's very in character, on brand.
Yeah. I mean, if it were food, I'd say Taurus. But I think since it's action, wanting more action, it makes sense that Aries is like, no, man, I need more. I need to really go big on this because my Mars is irritated. So I'm going to do it twice.
Yes. Now, what are some themes that we could think of? Okay. Themes that we could think of in general for eclipses happening on the Aries Taurus axis. I'm proposing that question to you. And then why might this eclipse be kind of important to this person whose chart we're staring at?
Yeah. So the Aries Libra axis, which is the one that we're coming into, we're thinking about Aries, cardinal. Both of these signs are going to be cardinal, fire and air, right? So we're thinking about a lot of activity going on, especially with Aries. We begin things. If you think about Aries starting the zodiacal year, starting spring, it's wanting to do, it's wanting to accomplish. It's not really thinking on the past. So maybe not drawing from experience as much as saying, I want something new. I want something exciting. I want to go big. Thinking about a solar eclipse. This is something that typically affects leaders. It would have been in medieval time kings. This would have been the day where there would have been like this temporary king on the throne for some reason, just in case something did happen to the king. At least it happened to that guy. That was a thing that happened. So thinking about in your world, who are the leaders, both globally and even like the manager at work, or just leadership disruptions or new things coming into play. Also knowing that whatever happens, we might have to sit with for a while because Mercury is going to go retrograde the very next day and is conjunct Uranus. So there's this flip, right? This 180, this unpredictability in the resources available that we're going to have to reassess between the 21st of April and the 15th of May. That's kind of tying into the eclipse, but also Taurus season. So that's like actually April 20th through May 20th, 21st, while the sun is in Taurus with Pluto square. So a lot of shifts of power, a lot of perhaps people driven toward power. You think about Aries, then moving into Taurus. So we think about the power would come through the resources. So how might there be a drive towards power through the control of resources? Which could show really positive things, like, you know, you gain ground on something. It's like capture the flag. Depending on which team that you're on, whoever gets the flag might be really good or might be not your favorite thing. So just to keep that in mind. And again, it is leadership stuff. So this may not blow up right in your face, as Aries might, you know, normally say, but it might be something that affects society. And then you get to decide how you choose to act upon that.
First, if you are a manager of something, don't go
don't be scared.
Okay. We're not, the whole world's not get out to get you.
No.
You know, depending on your chart, of course. Absolutely to all of that. And then looking at this particular person's chart, right? This is the opposition of their lunation cycle, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they natally have a full moon in Libra. This is a new moon in Aries. I would look back 2 weeks ago, right? Like now 3 weeks ago, and see what was happening during that full moon in Libra, what was coming up, what was transpiring. The North Node, where the node is going to be moving, which is where the North Node is going to be in Aries, does have that feeling of urgency, of chaos. So my thoughts are, you know, with the North Node in the 7th house, this eclipse season, the South Node in the first, there might be some big negotiations going on with your relationships, right? Like, or even something really big happening with your partner and having to sort of negotiate how that affects you in your life. For this person, it's very interesting because we're getting these big lunations that are affecting them. Right. Again, this is a story I'm sure they already know. And as that's happening, the sun moves into the house that's perfected for them. So, so it's almost like by the time they listen to this video, they should have a good idea what's going on with this 8th house story, because it's going to just jump out of the gate.
Yeah. And it's also a very unique situation where they can look back to the last new moon in Aries and say what was hinting at happening back then, because we have a new moon already again happening in Aries, which is very unique. So we've had this like, get ready, get set, here it all goes kind of feeling.
Absolutely. And then for everyone, go back in your charts, see what was going on 9 years ago, 18 years ago, when the eclipses, the eclipse seasons, when the nodes were in this part of your chart, and you're going to get some sort of story that's coming back up for you. Do you have years on that? I know you're so much quicker at finding these things than me.
I can pull up a calculator. So 9 years ago. 9 years ago from today was 2014.
Yeah. So 2014, roughly.
And 18 years ago from today was 2005.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So think back roughly that time of your life, what was going on, what stories are coming back up. And again, if you're like this person and these eclipses are hitting you on the angle, or they're hitting some significant planets, you're more likely to feel them.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it is angular in this person's chart. If you have a chart that is rising of Libra, of Capricorn, of Aries, or of Cancer, it's probably going to be angular in your chart. In fact, it is going to be angular in your chart, particularly whole sign. So you might notice it more in your personal sphere of influence, in your more noticeable thing. You're not going to need peripheral vision to see this show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think what else? We're running out of time.
Yeah, we're a little bit out of time. There is more to say on the eclipse itself. Again, you can check my YouTube on that. You can follow both of our YouTubes. CV everywhere is at Art of the Zodiac. I am at The Real KristaLyn. We would love to have you follow us on YouTube, Ask Me Astros, and as well on our personal accounts. And not to be outdone is what I was going to say. I don't know why I was going to say it, but also you can get even more engagement and interaction with us by joining our Patreon, Ask Me Astros. And if you would like your question featured on our next one, you can email us at askmeastros, go figure, @gmail.com.
Yes. And I am super, super excited about our Patreon. As you can tell, KristaLyn and I have two very different styles, which come together, I think, brilliantly. And the way that we lead our sessions, workshops, so all of them are going to be a little bit about the transits, astrology, what's happening, right? So you don't have to be an astrologer to work with us. And we use story as a way to engage with that. So a lot of actual writing, writing and astrology together combined.
Yep. If you want to experience the astrological world in contrasting color with two different perspectives teaching you, then this is something that's a really cool thing to be able to do. And we're honored to be a part of it and to be helpful.
Oh man, this has been brilliant. Can I just want to take a moment to thank Mercury for being with us and getting us through this, because this was a very rough beginning.
Yes. And everybody just thanking Mercury, be graceful with yourself. Take care with what you're doing. Give yourself time that you need and that you want to accomplish your tasks and do what you need, and give yourself as much support and accommodation as you need as you navigate these next few weeks with Mercury being retrograde. Check where Taurus is in your chart to see where that might be affecting you.
And also, I just want to say, I think Mercury retrogrades are really great times just to take a time out, right? To get slow, to reflect, to finish things, right? We're also in a balsamic moon right now. So it's a good time to just sort of figure out what we're letting go of. Recover, especially as the sun's going into Taurus. This does feel like a really nice recovery moment of what has been, as we've mentioned, a very tumultuous Aries season.
Yeah, but you made it.
We made it.
We made it. Yes. And we will be back next month and throughout to support you all the way through everything that's coming up next.
Yes. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye. End broadcast. End